All right, I think we'll get started. So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Friday morning. We're really excited to be able to share some information with you all today about the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program and the application process for the program. My name is Ina Lupin, and I'm the program manager for the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team, which administers this program. And I'm here with two of my colleagues who will be helping lead this workshop with me. So Kathleen Singh will be walking us through the application process in the second portion of the webinar. Kathleen, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a program associate with the case team at SGC who is administering this grant. And yeah, as Ina said, I'll be showing you all the application components in the second half of the presentation. And I'll pass it to Sarah Risher to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kathleen, and good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Risher. I'm a program analyst on the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team, and I will be running tech today. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Great, thank you both. We would also love for all of you who have joined us today to introduce yourselves via the chat. So if you'd like to, feel free to share your name, your organization, and the region that you work in, if you'd like. We also ask that you please stay on mute for the duration of the presentation today. You can post any questions that you have into the chat at any time during the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as we can during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you'd prefer to ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand during the Q&A session and we'll call on you to come off mute and ask your question. And then also, for any questions that we don't get to, we will follow up with a Q&A document responding to everything kind of following this webinar. So I know we have a lot of folks on the call, which is very exciting to see. So don't worry if we aren't able to get to your question. We will certainly do our best. Great, I think we can go to the next slide, Sarah. So this is our agenda for today. We'll start off with an overview of the Regional Climate Collaboratives program and walk through some of the application process and components. We'll talk through the technical assistance that we'll have available for the program, scoring criteria, timeline and resources, and then we will go into our Q&A session. After we've finished that portion of the webinar, we will then do some networking sessions that will be facilitated by our technical assistance providers. Those will be broken down by region, and you'll be able to kind of self-select into the region that you would like to join for those conversations. We can go to the next slide, please. Great. So we're really excited to kick off the first round of this program. It was established through legislation in 2018, actually, through SB 1072, and we only just received funding in this last funding cycle to implement the program. So we're really excited to be able to offer $8.35 million in this NOFA in a range of $500,000 to $1.75 million grants. The program is really aimed to assist under-resourced communities throughout the state to focus on a regional level on helping folks access statewide public and other grants. The program will fund cross-sector networks of partners in under-resourced communities to access funding to advance climate solutions. The program requires the creation of a collaborative stakeholder structure, which for those of you who are familiar with the Transformative Climate Communities program, you may already know about this structure, but we'll be able to dive into the details of that a little bit more in a moment. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, it's been a really long journey to get here since 2018. And so we've been able to do a ton of engagement with communities across the state to incorporate their feedback into the program design. As you can see here, we've engaged with 400 stakeholders all across the state through workshops, focus groups, and key informant interviews. And we really hope that incorporating all of this feedback will translate into a program that's very responsive and streamlined for applicants. Next slide, please. So these are our 4 program objectives. We have developing actionable plans and projects, building social infrastructure, centering community engagement and decision-making, and developing equity-centered processes. We're really hoping that all of the work that happens underneath this program is able to help advance all of these goals. Next slide, please. And so this program is very much focused on building capacity in under-resourced communities across the state. And so, you know, the ways that we see the collaboratives being able to do that are twofold. So we have the first here is building relationships, identifying priorities, and developing plans, policies, and projects. And then we also have acting as a local technical assistance provider that can translate funding program requirements and kind of frame them within a local context. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the role of RCCs in communities can really vary, I think, across the state, but they can serve as really important institutions within their communities, being able to, you know, particularly in some of the regions of the state that don't have as robust of a civil society sector, they can really help to support some of these cross-sectoral work that's coming together. They can also support on grant writing and administration, convening organizations within the region on climate-related issues as well. Next slide. So this is the list of eligible applicants. We have California Native American tribes, and this includes both federally recognized tribes and non-recognized tribes, or non-federally recognized tribes that are on the Native American Heritage Commission list. And so that's, that's the California Native American tribes. Then we also have community-based organizations, joint powers authorities, local government agencies, nonprofits and foundations, and small businesses. And then we have this kind of broader bucket of other organizations with a history of providing community-based outreach or technical assistance. And so we have a list of examples here, but I think there's an opportunity to be creative depending on you know, the different regions of the state and the organizations that applicants feel would be best suited to engage in their work, as long as they fit this criteria of having this TA and outreach experience. Next slide, please. And then one more. Perfect. So to talk a little bit more about the collaborative stakeholder structure, eligible applicants will need to form a regional collaborative stakeholder structure, and they will submit one application that's based on their shared vision. Each collaborative needs to select a managing stakeholder that can demonstrate the organizational capacity to complete the projects, as well as the financial capacity to receive and be accountable for the grant. As a part of the full application, applicants will collectively submit a partnership agreement that describes the governance and kind of organization of the collaborative stakeholder structure. We'll also be offering a template for folks to use if they would like to help support with that. And then another piece just to keep in mind is as a part of this collaborative stakeholder structure is that the enabling legislation for the program really underscores the importance of diverse partnerships. And so there's a scoring preference in the program for proposals that demonstrate strong and diverse representation, including partnerships with community-based organizations and other stakeholder groups. Next slide, please. So this graphic kind of helps, hopefully, with understanding how the collaborative stakeholder structure will work. The managing stakeholder will enter into a grant agreement directly with SGC, and they'll be managing all of the administrative activities with all of the other project partners. Next slide. And for the regional definition for the program, the program requires that you have kind of a regional boundary that spans between 1 and 8 contiguous counties. Applicants may choose to work within a region that's predefined through another initiative to the extent that it fulfills that requirement of the 1 to 8 contiguous counties. And, you know, if that's something that is helpful in their work plan. And then kind of within this broader regional boundary, collaboratives will select communities of focus where they will concentrate some of their more place-based work. And communities of focus need to be at least 2 under-resourced census tracts. At least 51% of the census tracts need to be under-resourced. So for example, the minimum is 2, but we don't have a maximum amount of census tracts. So for example, if you wanted to focus on 5 census tracts, at least 3 of them would need to be under-resourced. And so, as I said, we don't have a maximum number of census tracts, but we encourage applicants to think about the feasibility of doing meaningful work across the communities of focus that they select to kind of avoid biting off too much at once. And so you may be kind of wondering how we define under-resourced for this program. And the legislation actually sets out a definition that includes the top 25% of Cal and virus-screen disadvantaged communities, low-income communities according to Assembly Bill 1550, as well as communities with median household income of less than 80% of the state average. And so as you can see on this map, under-resourced communities constitute all of the blue that you'll see on this map. And as you can see, that covers a pretty significant amount of the state. Next slide, please. So these are a few interactive mapping tools that applicants can use to determine if a census tract is considered under-resourced. And we will be soon issuing a kind of guidance document that will help folks like understand how to use these tools and hopefully help to understand some of the project area requirements a little bit more. But basically, if a tract qualifies as disadvantaged or low income according to this first tool, the CARB priority populations map, or if they qualify as disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged according to the Department of Water Resources DAC mapping tool, then they would qualify as under-resourced. And yeah, as I said, we'll have a guidance document that will hopefully be able to provide some more detail on that as well. Next slide, please. Collaboratives will be able to kind of work on capacity building across scales. They should be conducting work at the place-based level within the communities of focus, and should also be kind of connecting some of the work that's happening at the local level to regional initiatives. So as you can see in this graphic that we put together, collaboratives can encourage peer-to-peer learning and sharing of best practices across communities of focus. And they're also able to engage at the regional level to ensure coordination and collaboration across scales. Next slide, please. So I already mentioned the NOFA amount, but you see that here. But one thing that I did want to highlight is that we offer advance payment through the program of up to 25% of the grant award amount. And we also plan to work with grantees to determine an invoicing schedule and a reporting frequency that works well for them. Next slide, please. And so here we have listed out all of the eligible costs. These are essentially all of the costs that are related to the kind of capacity building, community engagement, training, all of the activities of the collaborative. And so that could include staff time or salaries for staff. It could include administration and travel. It could also cover tools, subscription, and software related to community engagement, so things like Zoom or other engagement related tools. And also costs related to engagement, outreach, education, and training. So this could be printing of flyers, it could be, you know, renting out space for workshops, things like that. Some of the highlights here is that our indirect cost rate is capped at 30%. We offer food, childcare, and participation compensation as eligible costs as long as they're tied to a direct work product. And we do require that applicants set aside 3 to 5% of their budget for evaluation, as well as 3 to 5% of their budget for peer-to-peer learning. And this is really meant for collaboratives to be sure that they've set aside the capacity within the collaborative to be able to engage with our technical assistance providers on some of these evaluation related activities, as well as being a part of our peer-to-peer learning cohort and the convenings that we'll be doing for that engagement. And so, you know, this isn't the case that the collaborative will be doing kind of all of their engagement, all of their evaluation by themselves. It's really just making sure that they have the capacity to engage with our TA providers through that process. Another thing to note as well is that we have this 15% set aside for additional collaborative stakeholder partners. And so this could be valuable if, for example, a collaborative doesn't necessarily have all of their partners on board at the time of application, or they think that at some point in the future they may want to add an additional partner. They can have a set aside within their budget for adding other partners to their collaborative stakeholder structure later on down the line. Next slide, please. So in terms of ineligible costs, essentially we can't fund any costs that occur outside of the grant agreement term. We also can't cover any direct or indirect construction costs, as well as any advocacy work such as direct lobbying for the passage of a specific bill or local proposition. Also, in terms of the cost for community engagement and outreach, we're unable to pay for direct cash benefits or subsidies to participants, alcoholic refreshments, participant incentives such as door prizes, which are unrelated to specific community work products, and then any general meetings that don't specifically discuss or advance implementation of the RCC project. So we received a question on a previous webinar about kind of the difference between compensation for community members who are engaged in a process versus this kind of direct cash benefits or participant incentives that aren't eligible. And the answer there is that we really would need to see that the compensation is for engagement on work that is directly related to the work of the RCC. So having a stack of gift cards at an event would not necessarily be eligible, whereas working with a community partner on a specific project and being able to compensate them for their time would be. Next slide, please. Great, so these are, I'll be going through the required activities for the grant, but I'm not gonna read through all of them because there are quite a few. I would just really encourage anyone who's thinking about applying to the program to take a really close look at these. All of the bullets that I'll go through here are required activities that need to be addressed in the work plan. And so that's a threshold requirement for the program. It's important to show that all of these strategies, or sort of all the strategies that a collaborative proposes, align with at least one of the required or optional activities on the grant. So essentially, when you're putting together your work plan, you'll have a number of different strategies that a collaborative will be working on. And it'll be important to be able to indicate how those strategies are being able to cover all of the required activities of the grant. So this first bucket is the required activities related to building relationships, identifying priorities, and developing plans, policies, and projects. And then all of the required activities here below fall into that category. Next slide, please. This second bucket here is that kind of more technical assistance focused role of collaboratives, so supplementing program specific TA and acting as a local TA provider to translate funding program requirements and help frame them within the local context. Again, I won't read through these bullets, but these are all required activities as part of the grant. Next slide, please. These activities are related to evaluation and peer-to-peer learning, as I mentioned earlier. And so the evaluation requirements, as I talked about earlier, like collaboratives will work with implementation TA providers to develop metrics and a data collection system to track their progress towards their goals. And so these are required activities as a part of that process. And they will also engage in these peer-to-peer learning sessions that SGC will be putting on along with our TA providers. And collaboratives will be regularly surveying collaboratives to kind of better understand their training needs and the things that they are interested in engaging on in these peer-to-peer learning sessions. Next slide, please. So these are the optional activities for the grant, and they are the ones that are associated with data collection and analysis, as well as education and training. These are two categories of activities that actually aren't included in the statute for the program, but as I mentioned, we did a lot of listening sessions and engagement with communities across the state in developing the program, and we heard that these were really important pieces as well. So these are definitely eligible activities, but not necessarily required under the program. Next slide, please. And so as I mentioned a little bit before, the applicant's work plans are going to be divided into strategies that the collaborative proposes to undertake. So, you know, no one strategy needs to meet all of the required activities, but kind of the collective group of all the strategies within the work plan need to meet all of those required activities. And you know, I think it'll be really important for applicants to think about the strategies that are needed within the region that they're covering, as well as the expertise of the organizations within their collaborative stakeholder structure. So some of the strategies might focus on specific climate issues like wildfire or urban heat, or they may focus more broadly on climate resilience, partnership development, awareness raising, and then you know, they'll also vary in terms of scope and scale. So some strategies could focus on one specific community of focus, and then others could focus on 2 or 3, or potentially the entire region. So this will really be a place where applicants are able to kind of design the work of their collaborative stakeholder structure in a way that makes the most sense for their local context. Next slide, please. So our team put together an example strategies table that kind of outlines some examples of what the strategies that collaboratives undertake might look like. It's definitely not an exhaustive list of the kind of things that collaboratives could do, but it's hopefully helpful to conceptualize what a collaborative might end up doing, or basically give some inspiration to applicants. So this is one example that we included in this resource. And here the broad strategy is to support equitable planning and policy development across communities of focus. And then one of the tasks underneath that strategy could be to work with a local government within one community of focus to co-organize community engagement related to the development of an environmental justice element, for example. So RCC grant funds could be used to cover food and childcare and compensation for residents' time engaging in the planning process. So that, and then as you can see here, that addresses 3 of the required activities for the program. So if you haven't already taken a look at that resource, I would definitely encourage you to take a look through if you're kind of trying to think through what kinds of activities might make sense for your collaborative. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the project deliverables. We will ask for applicants to develop an RCC action plan that will specify key activities, identify roles and responsibilities, and establish timelines for the collaborative's work. Grantees are going to be developing this at the beginning of the grant term to kind of have some visibility over the plan moving forward over the 3 years of the grant term. Grantees are also required to compile capacity building materials and other deliverables created during the grant into their capacity building toolbox. And so this we're hoping will help serve as an ongoing resource for partners in the region kind of beyond the grant term, being able to offer some longer term sustainability of the work that the collaboratives have done. And then thirdly, the collaboratives will work with SGC to develop an inventory of community climate solutions. And so this would include all of the priority plans and projects that the collaborative developed and that are kind of ready to seek funding. This could be a really helpful database for folks to be able to engage with. Next slide, please. And then the reporting requirements for the program will include invoicing and high-level reports that will be provided at a regular interval. As I mentioned, SGC will work with the grantee to determine a reporting frequency that works well. And then collaboratives will also be required to create an annual report each year, updating SGC on the grant activities. The evaluation process will really help with this, and we'll be working on trying to make sure that that is a process that is valuable for collaboratives and isn't overly burdensome. I also want to note that tribal data and traditional ecological knowledge may be excluded from all project deliverables to ensure confidentiality. And so SGC will work with the grantee to ensure a clear process for excluding confidential tribal data in the grant agreement. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Kathleen, to talk about the application process.
Thank you, Ina. So yeah, now we will go over the application process. So we will have a two-phased application process, a pre-proposal application due on Friday, July 15th, and the full application due on Friday, October 7th. The pre-proposal is not required in order to submit the full application, but we highly recommend that applicants submit a pre-proposal. We cannot guarantee application TA to applicants who do not submit a pre-proposal. Next slide, please. So the pre-proposal process should help applicants think through some of the components that will be required as part of their full application. We are not asking applicants to develop a budget and work plan for the pre-proposal phase. These will be required at the full application stage, and we will provide budget and work plan templates to help applicants develop these components of the full application. The pre-proposal is meant to be a helpful way for applicants to conceptualize what their collaborative will look like and get feedback before working on the full application. Next slide, please. So this is on this slide, a screenshot of what the Microsoft Forms looks like. Just to note, you can all access the form and other resources on this link that I just dropped. That's like what you'll see when you open up the form, and is an example of like how the questions look and what you'll need to answer. And this will also have, in addition to it, a Word document version so that applicants can draft their responses on a separate document before inputting them into Microsoft Forms. And that form is available on our resources page, and the Word document is also available on the resources page, which I just dropped into the Zoom chat. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's the section outline of the pre-proposal, and that's all the main sections that will be filled out in the form. And this, again, is meant to help draft the full application and give applicants the opportunity to get feedback from SGC staff. The more that applicants put into their pre-proposal, the more benefit that they will get from SGC's feedback. And it's okay if some of the ideas shared in the pre-proposal change before applicants finalize their application, but the pre-proposal is a good opportunity to start working out the details of who project partners will be, what the work plan will look like, etc. We highly recommend that applicants draft their answers in the Word document first, since the Microsoft form must be filled and submitted in one sitting, and there is no way to create an account and return back to the form, for instance. Next slide, please. So we will review all pre-proposals to ensure applicant's proposal meets the threshold requirements. Again, those are on page 25 of the guidelines. And SGC staff will provide feedback and be available via office hours to help respond to applicants' questions. And we'll talk more about the office hours in a bit. Next slide, please. We will have application technical assistance to applicants who submit a pre-proposal and plan to submit a full application. Implementation TA will be available to grantees after awards have been made. The TA providers will assist applicants with the activities listed on this slide, depending on the support priorities for each applicant. Our application TA providers will introduce themselves on the next slide.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chuy Flores. I'm a Senior Associate at Estelano Advisors, and our firm alongside Better World Group, Institute for Local Government, and California Coalition for Rural Housing are excited to provide technical assistance for the first round and second round of the Regional Climate Collaboratives program. And as noted by Kathleen and Ina, we'll be providing application assistance, helping answer any questions and help form any strategies aligned with the program goals in preparation for your final application. Direct technical assistance will be offered after the pre-proposal, where SGC will be able to provide guidance and comments, and they will hand you over to us, where we can help you address those comments to get the best possible full application in by the deadline. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chuy. Next slide, please. And then the next one. Great, thank you. So here is what the full application will consist of. We will provide templates to assist applicants in completing the various components of the application. Additionally, our TA providers will assist applicants who submitted a pre-proposal. And I'll just go through on the next slide. And yeah, I'll go. So yeah, here I'll kind of go through these components that are listed and kind of describe them. So narrative questions, those will be similar to pre-proposal application structure with some additional questions and requests for more finalized versions of pre-proposal responses, like the vision statement, for example. The work plan and budget workbook, we will be releasing this workbook for applicants to work from along with the full application release. Partnership agreement. We plan to create and share a template that may be helpful for applicants in developing this agreement. Applicants are not required to use our template and are welcome to develop their own agreement as they see fit. The organizational chart or diagram of collaborative stakeholder structure will just be a visual representation of your collaborative and who's involved, and yeah, and that will just be something that's kind of charted out in like a typical graphic style. Region and communities of focus map. TA providers will be available to help with developing this map as needed. And then for the resolution, if the managing stakeholder is a public agency, they must provide evidence of a past formal resolution in the full application that includes an authorization to apply for and accept an RCC grant and authority to execute all related documents if awarded. We will be posting a template when we release the full application, but again, applicants are not required to use it and can develop their own as they wish. If the managing stakeholder is not a public agency, they must still include an authorization in the form of a formal letter or resolution passed by the organization's governing body. Letters of commitment, those are required from all co-applicants that are part of the collaborative stakeholder structure. Reference letters and background documentation is required to demonstrate all co-applicants' previous relevant experience. We will need a reference letter for each project partner, attesting to the organization's ability to fulfill their roles and responsibilities as specified in the work plan and partnership agreement. And then the letters of support, those are optional. Applicants may choose to include letters of support from other entities who are not included in the collaborative stakeholder structure, but that plan to support the collaborative without being formally included in the budget. Applicants may also want to include letters of support from entities that stand to benefit from the collaborative activities and would like to indicate their support. Next slide, please. So this is the scoring criteria, which the guidelines discuss this in detail on page 26, including an example of the scoring table with point allocations. Applications will be scored on their vision statement, project need and region, program objectives and strategies, collaborative stakeholder structure, and work plan and budget. We won't have time today to go through the scoring criteria in detail, but I highly recommend that applicants review the scoring criteria and guidance in section 11 of the guidelines as you are developing the concept for your collaborative to take scoring considerations into account early in the process. Next slide, please. Cool. So this is the timeline of the application process through the end of the year. So as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, pre-proposals are due Friday, July 15th, 5 p.m. Pacific. We'll have, once the full application is released, we'll have an overview webinar for that in July. And final grant applications will be due Friday, October 7th at 5 p.m. Pacific. And then the final awards will be announced at the council meeting on December 15th. Next slide, please. So here's a screenshot of the resources page that I dropped the link in the chat to. And this page is the hub for all RCC application materials and resources, including the guidelines and the notice of funding availability, in addition to the pre-proposal form and the pre-proposal Word document accompanying the form. And in addition to a Q&A document that is really helpful for just seeing if there's any more specific questions that you might find the answer to there. That will be helpful for that. And then there's also a collective impact resources document, which I'll discuss soon. And then also an example strategy table to help guide the application that you all will write. Yes, I can drop the link one more time. All right, so next slide, please. Right, so collective impact resources, that was one of the documents that is on this program resources page, and it is a collection of resources, case studies, and best practices that may support the development and continuation of collaborative work, such as the development of an RCC. SGC does not endorse any one model highlighted in this resource document, but we compile these resources to help applicants begin to imagine how their own collaborative might come together. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have weekly office hours for prospective applicants on Wednesdays from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. via Zoom. And office hours will begin starting Wednesday, June 15th. That's the following Wednesday from now, or so like next Wednesday, yeah. So next Wednesday, June 15th, and this will continue throughout the pre-proposal application period, which means that the last office hour we hold as SGC staff will be Wednesday, July 13th, because the pre-proposal is due on July 15th. And once the pre-proposals are submitted, and that is when the TA providers will be available to help for drafting the full application itself. So just to reiterate that, SGC staff will only host these weekly office hours until the pre-proposals are due. And next slide, please. So that concludes the collective impact resources can be found here on this site that I just dropped the link to, and it's on the right-hand side of the links, and you'll see it labeled, it'll be collective impact resources. But that concludes my portion of the presentation. So I'll hand it to Sarah and Ina to facilitate the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. I think that Sarah is going to help us kind of facilitate the Q&A. I know we have a lot of folks here, and so we will look through the questions in the chat, as well as if folks do want to ask their question verbally, you can feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask your question.
Sorry, I'm pulling up the chat here and scrolling. I'm so excited to see all the questions that came through during the presentation. So let me keep scrolling. Okay, I think these are all intros. So we will start. Okay, so the first question I'm seeing, and I'll go back through in a little bit to make sure I didn't skip any that might be before this, but Ina, is it possible to have a region be a city?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So we do have the regional designation, or sort of the boundary requirement of being 1 to 8 contiguous counties. But a community of focus could be like broken down by census tracts, but it could focus on a specific portion of a city, or it could focus on an entire city if that was something that was needed, as long as it meets the requirements of all of the communities of focus being at least 51% under-resourced. And again, I think that collaboratives can kind of figure out like the extent to which they want to do a lot of the place-based work and how much they want to engage on the regional level. In some cases, there may be a lot of engagement on the regional level. In some cases, it may be a lot more focused on kind of the place-based level with communities of focus. But we do have that requirement of the 1 to 8 contiguous counties for that regional boundary.
Great. As a related question, regarding eligibility, would one of 2 census tracts meet the eligibility requirements? I'm assuming this means if one of 2 census tracts is under-resourced. But Alyssa Gordon, please come off mute if I misinterpreted that question.
No, that you're spot on. That's the question.
Okay. Great. Yeah, so we do, the requirement is for 51% of the census tracts to be considered under-resourced. And so if there are only 2 census tracts, they would both need to be under-resourced. I think that probably many collaboratives will have more than 1 census tract. Of course, that's something to kind of, for applicants to think about. But yeah, that is the requirement. And I think, you know, the real goal of this program is to support some of the most under-resourced communities in the state in order to help them build capacity and access grant funding. But the reason that we didn't want to make it kind of exclusively focused on under-resourced communities is that we recognize that you know, the data isn't always perfect, and sometimes there are communities that really are under-resourced and need that extra support, but may not be classified as such. And so yeah, just to add a little bit more context and explanation on that requirement. But yeah, it would be required if there were just 2 census tracts for them to both be under-resourced.
Thank you for that. I think I also got my question answered with your answer to the first question, which was city versus county. So conceptually, you're going to have more than 2 census tracts in a county. So perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify there on that point though, the county like regional boundary is not necessarily like, you wouldn't need for all of your communities of focus to cover the entire county. The focus would be, you would have maybe, for example, if you wanted to work in one specific county, the boundaries would be that county, and then you would have some like one or more communities of focus that constitute at least 2 census tracts that are under-resourced, but with no cap on how many census tracts, but they would have to be 51% under-resourced. We'll be issuing some guidance on this because I know it can sometimes be a little bit confusing, and are also happy to respond to questions as they're coming up as folks get sort of further through the process and might have questions as they're kind of deciding on some of those project area questions.
Great. This question from Edgar, are you also considering CalEnviroscreen as an additional tool? The priority populations map does take in the data from CalEnviroscreen. So yes, that tool can be used to determine eligibility. This comment from Lorenzo Lee, the Prop 1 DWR DAC mapping tool will be updated with the 2020 census information that just became recently available. That's a great flag. So we can look into that and see if our map needs to be updated. Okay, Garrett is asking, what can happen to the unspent funds if there are no new partners, or if less than what is budgeted is spent on new partners?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in that case, we would be able to do an amendment to the budget. And I think that's something that we would kind of work out with each one of the grantees as they're kind of moving on through the process. But there is an opportunity to amend the budget if things change, or it seems like the collaborative decides that they don't want to add any additional partners in the end, and they could reallocate that to other pieces within their budget.
Great. Okay, so it was a question from Aaron. Can collaboratives hire a grant writer to draft grant applications for partners during the grant period? So is that an eligible cost?
Yes, I think that would be an eligible cost that would fit under the staff salaries piece. So collaboratives, I think, would just need to make a case for how that meets the goals of the program and what that would look like. But yes, salaries are covered, and there is that technical assistance required activity as a part of the grant.
Great. Some questions here. Will you have access to the slides after the webinar? Yes, we'll send them out, and we are also recording today's session, so we'll send out the recording as well. Let's see, what kind of technical assistance is offered, and who are the TA providers and their expertise? This question from Alice. Is this a question for the application technical assistance, and has that question since been answered during Kavleen's portion of the presentation, or are you curious about the implementation technical assistance?
That question was asked before you actually introduced the technical assistance team, so pardon me. If you can clarify what sorts of capacities and expertise are they offering in both this stage and in the implementation? And are they the same in the implementation stage?
Yeah, I can take that one if you want, Sarah. Yeah, I think that, so the technical assistance team that we have on board is focused specifically on application TA. They'll be providing technical assistance for the first round of the program as well as the second round. And they'll also be kind of supporting on capacity building in between the two rounds. So if there are some applicants that either apply and aren't selected for a grant in the first round, they could work with TA providers during that period to get ready for the second round. Or if there are also some folks who may not have applied in the first round, but are interested and would like to work with the TA providers to kind of start developing that piece, that will be available. We included a list in the PowerPoint of the services that are offered for TA, and it's also in the NOFA. So I don't want to run through it because I might miss some things, but they'll essentially be able to really help folks work through their full application and supporting on things like developing their partnership agreement and their work plan, and kind of being able to support as needed in getting that, that full application together. But I would refer you for the full list to the NOFA or the presentation slides that we'll be sharing. And then for the implementation technical assistance, that will be a separate team. We haven't released the RFP for that team of TA providers yet, but we'll certainly let folks know as soon as we have that TA team on board, and they will be focused on supporting applicants in the implementation of their regional climate collaborative, as well as some of the evaluation components and that peer-to-peer learning work that we'll be doing as well to encourage sort of cross-pollination across RCCs.
Thank you.
Of course.
This next question here, for the scoring component, project need and region, can you describe what factors you use to evaluate the region?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely encourage everyone to take a look at the guidelines scoring detail, because we didn't get a chance today to kind of walk through all of the detail, but we kind of just showed like the high level buckets, but there's a lot more detail in the guidelines that can hopefully be helpful. In terms of the factors for project need and region in particular, the region piece is very much, looking for a justification from applicants as to why they selected that region and the communities of focus. So I think, one piece as well that the reviewers will be looking at is whether or not the communities of focus just barely meets the 51% under resource communities threshold, or, kind of goes above and beyond. So that's something that is outlined in that scoring proposal, or sort of in the scoring information in the guidelines that could be helpful. But yeah, I think we'll be really looking for a strong explanation from the applicants that shows that they've put some thought into the way that they've created their region and the boundaries of their region, as well as the selection of those communities of focus.
Thanks, Ina. Seeing some questions here about office hours. So just want to reiterate that office hours will be every Wednesday starting June 15th and ending July 13th. They'll be at the same time from 11 a.m. to noon. And it will be the same link that Kathleen dropped in the chat. You don't need to pre-register or anything. You can just hop on the Zoom link and we'll have our team available. We can go into breakout rooms depending how many folks show up to answer questions and have conversation, and no obligation to stay the whole time, just stay as long as you need to get your questions answered. Okay. This question, can managing stakeholder charge overhead on sub-awardees?
That's an interesting question. Is that asking for sub-awardees to pay the managing stakeholder overhead, or like to pull that from their, could maybe Sarah clarify that if you're on the line?
Just trying to think of the best way to phrase this, but yeah, just trying to get a better sense of that. I think it's 30% for overhead, how that would be charged with the grant overall.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So within the budget, it would just be like when putting together the budget for the with the grant proposal, the overhead, the overall overhead amount would need to be only up to 30% of the full grant amount. So you know, that could be overhead that is going to the sub-awardees, for example, or it could be the managing stakeholder. That's something that the collaborative can kind of figure out how they want to split up those pieces. But then when the grantee would invoice us for their overhead amount, they would just add that line. And then the managing stakeholder would be the one who would be in charge of managing invoicing with all of the other sub-awardees. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, yeah.
Great. Okay, so this next question, how specific can the strategies be? For example, we focus on food justice and food systems.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that essentially the strategies can be very specific if the applicant feels that that makes sense. I think that the overall work plan should show that the Regional Climate Collaborative is working across you know, some different issues. So we probably wouldn't want to see a collaborative that's focusing on one very specific issue, because we'd like to be able to see how collaboratives are able to support the region moving forward on a number of climate-related goals, be it, you know, mitigation, adaptation, resiliency. So can be very broad. There's obviously not a requirement that every collaborative focus on everything, but I think we wouldn't want things to come in like too narrowly focused on one specific issue. However, for a strategy within a work plan, there may be a strategy that's focused specifically on food systems. We would just want to be able to see that connection be made in the application of how that work is related to climate resiliency, to climate mitigation, essentially making that connection to climate, however the applicant sees that, understands that connection.
I think that answered another question I see here from Erica about having wastewater as the focus, and they noted they could tie in some of these other topics. But Erica, please feel free to let us know if that didn't respond to your question as well. This other question, is a partnership agreement required to be fully signed by all the partners before the final application deadline?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, that is a requirement for the program. We are working on a template to hopefully help with that process. And as I mentioned before, there can be an opportunity to set aside 15% of the budget for other partners if at the time of application, maybe one partner isn't on board fully and hasn't signed on to the partnership agreement. So there may be some flexibility there, but that is a component of the application to have a fully signed partnership agreement. And it would basically be an MOU that all of the partners would put together and sign.
Okay, seeing more questions coming in the chat, so I'm just going to keep reading them off. Do tribal coalitions need to have non-tribal partners?
Oh, this is a great question that we've received previously. So I think that for this question, that is an eligible, like that would be an eligible project, like that we could have a fully tribal collaborative come forward. And I think, you know, that would be eligible for the program. The one thing that I would just want to note is that, as I mentioned in the presentation, the legislation, SB 1072, does call out this kind of diverse partnerships of different types of organizations. And so there is some scoring criteria that's focused on bringing together diverse partners that I would encourage anyone who's thinking about that to take a look at and, take that into consideration. I think the way that we see diverse partnerships could be quite broad, and it could really be, organizations, tribal serving organizations that tribes trust and feel comfortable including in their collaborative. It could be, small businesses that the tribes have experience working with. It could be a school district, or it could be a lot of different things. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a public agency, which I know is sometimes a misconception on this program, but we don't have a requirement that a public agency be a part of a collaborative. They're absolutely eligible if they would like, if any collaboratives come forward with public agencies, but it's not a requirement for the program. So I hope that adds is helpful for that question.
And Ina, is there a maximum number of partners that are required for the collaborative?
There's no maximum number. There is a minimum number though, of 4 partners, which I realized I actually didn't say in the presentation, but that's an important piece. So at least 4, including managing stakeholder, and then at least 3 project partners, but no maximum number.
Okay, great. These 2 questions are a little bit similar, and so I'll ask them together. Can 2 different proposals be submitted by one managing stakeholder with different concepts and different co-applicants? And then can co-applicants serve on multiple proposal teams?
Great. So yes, different proposals, like co-applicants can put in more than one proposal or be involved in more than one proposal. And we have some language in the guidelines on this, but what we're really looking for is some justification that explains, that organization would have the capacity to engage with both pieces. So I think I would say I would encourage folks to look at the language in the guidelines there about being able to engage in both places. As for whether or not one managing stakeholder can submit 2 separate applications, I actually am not remembering what we said in the guidelines. Sarah or Kathleen, do you happen to remember what we included in there? We'll follow up in the Q&A document either way to clarify.
About managing stakeholders serving on 2 different applications? Mm-hmm.
I know that we made it possible to be co-applicants, but I don't remember if we said managing stakeholders.
Yeah, I think they can serve, like one entity can be a managing stakeholder and one application, say it's like a larger organization that serves multiple regions or statewide, they can serve as a managing stakeholder on one application and then be a partner or co-applicant on another, but I don't believe that they can be managing stakeholder on multiple projects, multiple applications.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And also, as I said before, we'll be posting a Q&A document and we'll make sure that we clarify. There is also some language in the guidelines that might be helpful there too. But yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, that was a good question. So just want to uplift, Kathleen responded to this question in the chat that we do, is there a forum or platform for entities to meet and potentially find partners? We do have a LinkedIn group that RCC networking LinkedIn hub. Anyone can join. Kathleen dropped the link in the chat. And that's a space where you folks can see who's interested in this program from their region and form potential partnerships. Okay, this next question, in key attributes, how do you determine established trust. It would be nice to make sure this funding doesn't establish a collaborative just for the grant and is a trusted entity that will be consistent over time. So I believe, and in key attributes, you're referring to the key attributes of managing stakeholder. Is that correct, Ellie?
Correct.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really good question that I think is helpful for us to kind of respond that in the guidelines, the language that we have around key attributes for managing stakeholders are not requirements. They're really meant to kind of help applicants think through, who would be best suited to fulfill that role on their collaborative. So I think in terms of, I don't know that we have like a set definition for established trust, but I think there really is an opportunity for applicants to start thinking about, who are those organizations that are trusted, that are kind of anchor institutions within their communities, and that would be well suited for that kind of a role. And definitely agree that, the way that we've designed the program and have really thought about trying to create this sort of capacity building toolbox that collaboratives, make available even after the grant term, or really as much as possible trying to have a longer term impact and be able to ensure that the work that's happening under this Regional Climate Collaboratives program is building capacity over time. So definitely agree that it's very important to have an entity that's able to engage over a long period of time. And I think we would leave the decision around like how to determine whether an organization has that established trust or that kind of definition of what that is to the applicants when they decide on their managing stakeholder.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just, noticing the dynamic that has occurred in the collective impact space over several decades that I've been part of it. 10 years ago with the public health sector, there was a lot of collective impact type of funding that went out. A lot of groups formed and dissipated. And so I would hate for that same pattern to happen in the climate space. So I think it's important that trust is a key component. We figure out how to really demonstrate that, and then that we're not over prescriptive in how the collaborative forms in each community, because that's really going to limit the type of groups that go after it. So I think it's really important to stay in tune with those dynamics over time.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I think that's really important, and appreciate you raising it. I did want to mention as well that in our scoring for the program, we do have a score related to the managing stakeholder having the experience and organizational capacity to implement the RCC proposal. But I think we're really looking for applicants to think through for themselves, like who that trusted organization is in their community, and what makes the most sense for their collaborative.
I have a few direct messages. Curious, because RCC isn't funding, direct or indirect costs related to construction. Do we have any recommendations on where to find funding for such costs? So Kathleen, I was wondering if you can drop in the chat a link to the state grant portal. That is a database that the state offers for folks to find funding for infrastructure costs. And then we can drop our email ta@sgc.gov in the chat to connect online to help point some other funding opportunities your way, since we know this program is not funding construction related costs. Okay.
Quickly, go ahead. Sarah, add a plug for our collective impact resource document, which also has the grants portal, the state grants portal, but there are a few other places to find information about federal grants as well in there. So that could also be another good resource.
Oh, yes. Thanks so much for plugging that, Ina. Okay, this next question, would the SGC or the TA teams that work with collaboratives that submit pre-proposals consider introducing teams to each other if they see alignment and strengthening of a singular proposal together in a full application, rather than two teams competing against each other for similar concepts or visions?
Yeah, thanks for asking this. I think we're organizing these networking sessions during these workshops. We've also created a LinkedIn hub where folks are able to hopefully connect with one another. But once we get in, and I think our TA providers, as they're doing outreach and engaging with folks, are trying as much as possible to put folks in touch who are thinking about putting together an application within the same region to see if there are opportunities to collaborate. And then once we have received pre-proposals, we'll do that on a more formal level. Our TA providers will lead that process, since SGC needs to have a level of impartiality and not be kind of putting together teams. With that being said, I think we're not going to push folks too hard, because we recognize that like sometimes that partnership may not work for different reasons. It might be that the two teams are focused on different things, or for whatever reason don't want to collaborate. And so we'll really leave that up to applicants to decide if they would like to submit separate proposals or come together in one proposal. And then I think we've said in the guidelines that we will be taking, geographic distribution into consideration when we make a selection, but we also don't, we don't completely preclude ourselves from potentially funding more than one collaborative in a region if we have a really good justification for seeing that there are two collaboratives that may be really necessary in that space and are doing kind of separate work. So yeah, I hope that responds to that question.
This next question is asking about, is there a minimum or maximum number of pages allowed for the pre-proposal? So we have the Microsoft forms. So there's no minimum or maximum number of pages because it's a preset form, but with each question, we do offer a number, like a word limit. So everyone's responding, their proposals will be about the same length. Let's see. Ellie, this is a really helpful comment here that you provided in the chat, that just pushing back that food systems is, not a narrow topic. There's a variety of intervention points within the food system that is critical to climate, and you list a few here. And it's in order to build meaningful partnerships, we need to choose our lanes carefully. Really appreciate that and agree that applicants can find ways to, in their applications, if they are focused on one topic within that broader topic, focus in on some of these other areas that you've listed, however they see it working for them.
Yeah. If I could just weigh in super quickly on that. Yeah, I agree. I think when I was saying that there shouldn't be a super narrow focus, I wasn't referring to food systems being a super narrow focus. I do understand that that can be very broad, but I think that it's kind of important to be able to see how the collaborative can be able to address kind of a broad range of issues related to climate. And so, yeah, I think that that's something we'll be really excited to see the proposals that come in from folks, and we're really just trying to give some guidance to help support, folks in thinking through their work plans. But I think, we'll be interested to see what people think is the most useful and needed in their region in particular.
Can public agencies join a collaborative later, for example, in the implementation round? I think this question might be mixing up the RCC program just a bit with the Transformative Climate Communities program. RCC is just a 3-year grant term, all focused on capacity building. So yeah, I think public agencies could potentially join, later using that 15% set aside, or they can be plugged in after the established as collaborative as a, partner to the collaborative, but don't need to be an official partner in the grant, if that makes sense. Would you add anything to that, Ina?
No, I mean, I think that covers it. I would just, I think the implementation piece of the program, there's no like implementation grant that's specifically set up for RCC in the same way that it is for some programs that have a planning phase and then an implementation phase. But yes, to Sarah's point earlier, I think a public agency could potentially come in later using that 15% set aside for new partners.
Next question, the SURF grant guidelines from OPR note that SURF applicants must connect with an RCC. Do you have any more information regarding this?
Great question. I think, I don't know that I have a lot to add in terms of more information, but I think that there is an opportunity for, as the SURF work is getting up to speed, that there's an opportunity for RCCs to engage with the high road. I'm going to forget the name for the collaboratives that are coming together under the SURF program, but there is an opportunity for them to engage with one another and to be sort of coordinated. There's no kind of specific requirement in our guidelines about a need to engage in that process. But for anyone who's applying for SURF, I think there could be real opportunities for engagement across both efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I believe that in those guidelines it says if applicable, because there, might not be an RCC in every SURF region, just given the difference in the size of the funding of the two programs. This next question, I assume only the lead applicant, or we refer as the managing stakeholder, needs to have the letter from the governing board. Is that correct? Or does each partner need to have a letter from their governing entity? This may be difficult for academic partners.
Yes, this is just for the managing stakeholder, that they would need to have a resolution. We will need to have a letter of commitment, though, coming from all of the partners. And so we can provide maybe more information about what's required for that letter. But there is that letter of commitment that needs to come from all of the partners.
Great. So another question related to SURF, asking if we can clarify and give more guidance about the relationship between RCC pre-proposal teams that may be forming. I'm not sure if we have too much more guidance to provide, but we're happy to connect you with the SURF team if that would be helpful to learn a little bit more from their perspective on how they see these programs connecting. And it's really up to, again, like it's not a requirement, it's up to the priorities of each application team. If plugging into the SURF process is important to your particular RCC, then you can do that, but you don't have to. Okay, if multiple proposals are being submitted by separate applicants, but represent a similar area. Would the funder request a collaboration to combine the applicant's work, or would they result in competing or both receiving an award? This is a similar question from earlier, but I think it'd be helpful to respond to again.
Sure. Yeah. So essentially for like during the pre-proposal process, TA providers will be able to kind of hopefully connect folks within a region who are interested in applying, so that you know, folks can be aware that somebody else is putting in an application and they may choose to partner together. We don't require that folks, you know, submit just one application from each region. It's really something that we would leave up to the applicant team to decide if they would like to collaborate with another group that's putting together an application, or if they want to keep those proposals separate. So yeah, it's essentially up to the applicants, but we will certainly do our best to help connect applicants so that they're at least aware of each other and aware of the opportunity to partner if they wish to. And we have networking sessions after this, this meeting, and then also the LinkedIn Hub that I definitely want to give a plug for in case folks are looking for partners or looking to better understand who in their region may be putting together a proposal.
I think we have just about 2 more minutes left before Ina, we pass it to you to give an overview of the networking session. So wanted to see if anyone had any final questions. You can drop in the chat or feel free to come off mute.
Great. Wow. Really appreciate all of these questions. I think these are incredibly helpful for us. Oh, and question about the networking sessions coming through. So that was actually exactly what I was going to talk about. So that's a perfect segue. So we will be having networking sessions starting now through noon at the end of the webinar, and we will create breakout rooms split out by region, and those will be facilitated by our technical assistance providers. So it'll be a good opportunity to engage with folks who are interested in applying for the program within the region that you're working in, and you know, hopefully will be great conversations. So I don't know that I have much else to add there, but if anyone is having tech issues in being able to access those, we can help you with that. But I think maybe, Sarah, we can just launch those breakout rooms and let folks select which room they'd like to join.
Yes, I need 1 more second and then I'll be able to launch them. I'm creating them right now.
Okay. No worries.
We will have 8 rooms, and I'll just quickly read off the name so you know what you can select into. So we have the North State and the Sierra Nevadas as 1 room. Then we have the Capital Region, the Bay Area, Central Valley, Inland Empire, and Imperial County as 1 room, Central Coast, Orange and San Diego counties, and then the last room is Los Angeles County. And we created these based off of the attendee or registrant list. So I did just now open those rooms. You can self-select, but as Ina said, if you need to be manually moved by me, please let me know.